The metal cuffs around Daniel Harlan's wrists felt colder than the alien stares watching him. He stood in the center of a grand chamber, surrounded by towering figures with scales like obsidian and glowing red eyes that never blinked. The Zorith Dominion had ruled the stars for thousands of years, their empire stretching across countless systems, conquering weaker races with ease. To them, humans were nothing, an insignificant species barely capable of space travel. Daniel had been taken as a prisoner of war, not because humanity had lost a battle, but because the Zorith never considered them a real threat. The tribunal was merely a formality, a demonstration of their authority. His fate had already been decided. The Zorith warlord, draped in golden armor, rose from his throne. His voice was deep and guttural, his sharp teeth visible as he spoke. "You are weak, human, unworthy of death by our blades. Instead, we offer you honor." The alien warriors surrounding him let out a low growl, their version of laughter. Daniel didn't react. He had heard the rumors, understood what was coming next. The warlord extended a clawed hand toward a holographic display that flickered into existence, showing a planet below Varath. A cursed world. A place where not even the Zorith dared to build colonies. "You will be exiled," the warlord continued, his voice dripping with amusement. "No human has ever set foot on Varath. You will be the first. You will not last a single night." The warriors roared, slamming their fists against their armored chests. To them, this was entertainment. A human struggling against the horrors of Varath was a spectacle, a reminder that the weak had no place in the stars. Daniel clenched his jaw but said nothing. He wouldn't beg. He wouldn't scream. He had made peace with death a long time ago, back when Earth first encountered the cold brutality of the galaxy. He had seen entire colonies burned to the ground by aliens who thought themselves gods. If this was how he would die, so be it. But he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing fear in his eyes. The transport shuttle rattled as it broke through the thick storm clouds of Varath. The pilot, a Zorith warrior, glanced back at Daniel with a smirk before deactivating the restraints. "Run, little human," he sneered. "Make it entertaining for us." The moment the shuttle's ramp lowered, the air hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. The atmosphere was thick, humid, carrying a scent that reeked of decay. The sky above was dark, streaked with green lightning that crackled against the swirling black clouds. Strange, twisted trees stretched toward the heavens like skeletal fingers, their bark pulsing with an eerie blue glow. The ground beneath him was damp, almost alive, shifting slightly as if it could swallow him whole at any moment. Before Daniel could take a step, the shuttle's engines roared to life, kicking up a storm of dust and debris as it lifted off. The Zorith were already laughing over their comms, placing bets on how long he would last. He ignored them. His focus was on survival. He had no weapons, no supplies, just the clothes on his back and the instincts that had kept him alive in countless battlefields. He moved cautiously, scanning his surroundings. Every shadow felt like it was watching him. The trees groaned as if whispering secrets, and in the distance, a deep guttural roar echoed through the jungle. He wasn't alone. Night came faster than he expected, and with it, the true horror of Varath revealed itself. The jungle came alive with monstrous shapes slithering through the darkness, glowing eyes peering from the undergrowth. A deafening shriek split the air, followed by the heavy thud of something massive moving through the trees. Daniel pressed himself against a rocky outcrop, his heart pounding. The Zorith were right, no human had ever set foot here. Because no human had ever been given the chance. This wasn't just a planet. It was a hunting ground. Then he saw it. A creature unlike anything he had ever encountered before emerged from the foliage. It stood nearly 15 feet tall, covered in thick obsidian black armor that reflected the eerie glow of the jungle. 6 burning red eyes locked onto him, its breath heavy with the scent of raw meat. Clawed hands flexed, the tips dripping with some unknown toxin. The ground trembled as it took a step forward, each movement slow and deliberate. This was a predator, and Daniel was its prey. His mind raced. Running was pointless. Hiding was impossible. He had no weapon, no plan, nothing but his will to live. He crouched low, never breaking eye contact, his fingers curling into fists. The creature let out a low, rumbling growl, as if amused by his defiance. Then, without warning, it lunged. Daniel threw himself to the side, rolling across the damp ground as the beast's claws sliced through the air inches from his head. He barely had time to recover before it turned, faster than something its size had any right to be. It swiped again, and this time, Daniel used the momentum to duck beneath its arm, slamming his fist into its exposed side. Pain shot up his arm like he had punched solid steel, but the creature hesitated, surprised by the attack. That hesitation was all he needed. He bolted, not blindly, not in panic, but with purpose. He had spotted something earlier, a jagged rock formation with sharp, natural spires. If he could lure the creature there, maybe, just maybe, the beast roared, chasing after him with thunderous steps. Each breath burned his lungs, but he pushed forward, dodging roots, leaping over fallen trees. The spires came into view, towering like the ribs of some ancient, long-dead monster. He reached the edge and spun around just as the creature lunged again. This time, he didn't run. Instead, he dove to the side at the last second. The beast crashed headfirst into the spires, its own momentum impaling it onto the jagged stone. A piercing screech filled the air as dark liquid oozed from its wounds, the once mighty predator now thrashing in pain. Daniel staggered back, chest heaving. He had done it. He had survived the first night. But as he looked up at the storm-filled sky, he knew this was only the beginning. The Zorith had sent him here to die. They had made a mistake, because he wasn't dead yet. And he had no intention of dying at all. The jungle of Arath was never silent. Even in the dead of night, strange noises filled the air, distant roars, the rustling of unseen creatures slithering through the undergrowth, and the eerie clicking sounds that echoed from the treetops. Daniel Harlan sat with his back against a massive rock, his body aching from exhaustion, his mind sharp despite the fatigue. He had survived the first night, but he knew that was just the beginning. The real battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. His stomach growled, reminding him that hunger would soon become his greatest enemy. Water was another problem. The damp air was thick with moisture, but that wouldn't be enough. He needed to find food, shelter, and something to use as a weapon. He couldn't just keep running. If he wanted to survive, he needed to hunt. Morning on Varath was different from any planet he had known. The sky was a swirling mix of green and orange, the thick clouds casting strange shadows over the land. Strange birds with translucent wings glided overhead, their piercing cries breaking the eerie stillness. The jungle floor was covered in bioluminescent fungi, glowing faintly in the dim light. Everything on this planet seemed alive, as if the very ground was watching him. But Daniel didn't let the alien landscape distract him. He needed to stay focused. He needed a plan. He knelt beside a large puddle of water, dipping his fingers in and sniffing cautiously. It smelled different, but it didn't burn his skin. That was a good sign. He took a tentative sip, the liquid cooling his parched throat. It tasted metallic, but it was drinkable. One problem down. Now, he needed food. His first instinct was to look for fruit or edible plants, but he quickly realized that nothing here looked remotely familiar. The plants pulsed with a faint glow, some releasing tiny spores into the air. Touching the wrong one could be deadly. He needed meat. But without a weapon, hunting would be impossible. His eyes scanned the jungle, searching for anything he could use. That's when he spotted the bones. A scattered pile lay near the base of a tree, partially buried beneath the dirt. They were massive, larger than any human bones, with deep bite marks carved into them. Whatever had left them behind was either careless or had no fear of scavengers. Daniel crouched beside them, picking up a long, sharp fragment. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. He wrapped a strip of cloth from his sleeve around the base, creating a crude dagger. It wouldn't last long against a real predator, but it was better than nothing. The jungle was a maze of towering trees and thick vines, each step filled with the unknown. Every movement had to be calculated. He needed to find something smaller, something he could actually kill. Then he saw it. A creature no larger than a wolf, its body covered in sleek, black fur with 6 legs and glowing blue eyes. It moved cautiously, sniffing the air, its ears twitching at every sound. It hadn't noticed him yet. This was his chance. He crouched low, gripping his makeshift dagger tightly. The creature took a step closer, pausing to examine the ground. Slowly, carefully, Daniel shifted his weight, inching forward. He was nearly within striking distance when a deafening roar shattered the air. The smaller creature bolted, disappearing into the undergrowth in the blink of an eye. But Daniel wasn't looking at it anymore. His blood turned to ice as he turned toward the source of the sound. A monstrous figure emerged from the trees, its massive body moving with terrifying grace. It was the same beast from the night before. The Vorgath. Its 6 glowing eyes locked onto him, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. It had been tracking him. The wound from their last encounter had barely slowed it down. Now, it was here to finish what it had started. Daniel's mind raced. Running wouldn't work. He had barely escaped last time, and that was only because of the spires. He didn't have that advantage now. Fighting it head-on was suicide. He needed another way. Then an idea formed in his mind. It was risky, insanely risky, but it was his only shot. He forced himself to remain still, tightening his grip on the dagger. The beast took a slow step forward, its claws digging into the ground. It was waiting for him to run. That's what prey did. But Daniel wasn't prey. He let out a sharp, sudden shout, slamming his fist against the nearest tree. The noise echoed through the jungle, startling the creature. It hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Daniel turned and sprinted not away, but toward a massive tree with thick, twisted roots. The beast roared and charged after him, its powerful limbs shaking the ground with every step. He could hear it getting closer, feel the heat of its breath on his back, but he didn't stop. He dove between the roots, rolling onto his feet as the monster lunged forward. At the last second, he twisted his body, using the dagger to slash at its exposed underbelly. The blade barely cut through its thick hide, but the sudden pain made the creature recoil. Daniel scrambled backward, using the moment of distraction to climb onto the nearest branch. The beast snarled, thrashing against the roots, but they were too thick for it to squeeze through. It roared in frustration, its glowing eyes filled with rage. Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he didn't celebrate yet. This wasn't over. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to win. For hours, he watched the creature, studying its movements, learning its patterns. He wasn't just a man trapped on an alien world anymore. He was a hunter. And this beast, the one that had nearly killed him, was now his target. He wasn't just going to escape it. He was going to tame it. And when he did, the Zorith would learn what true fear was. The Zorith warriors gathered in the grand hall, their laughter echoing through the chamber as they watched the holographic display hovering before them. The exile had been over for weeks, and by now, the human would have met his end, devoured by the horrors of Varath. No species had ever survived there. The jungle itself was a death sentence, filled with creatures that could crush bones with a single bite or melt flesh with their venom. The Zorith had sent Daniel Harlan there, not as a test, but as an amusement, a cruel joke played on a species they considered insignificant. They had long stopped monitoring the planet, convinced of his death. Yet, as the warlord sat on his throne, watching a new transmission from the orbiting scouts, his expression darkened. The transmission showed movement, something massive emerging from the jungle's thick mist, marching toward the extraction zone. The blurry figure became clearer with every step, and the hall, once filled with laughter, fell into silence. It was a man. It was the human, Daniel Harlan. And he was not alone. Beside him, the shadows of the jungle parted to reveal the towering form of the beast, the Vorgath. The same predator the Zorith had feared for generations, its 6 glowing eyes scanning the surroundings with an intelligence that was never supposed to exist in a mindless killer. Its black armored hide bore scars, but it stood tall, walking in perfect sync with the human beside it. Daniel's once ragged clothes were torn, replaced with armor fashioned from the jungle's deadliest creatures. His face was marked with battle-worn determination, his eyes locked onto the Zorith shuttle that had come for an empty retrieval. But now the hunters had returned. The pilot inside the shuttle hesitated, his claws twitching over the controls. This wasn't possible. The human should have been dead. The beast should have been another corpse rotting in the undergrowth. But now they stood together. A deep growl rumbled through the hall as the warlord rose from his throne, his golden armor reflecting the dim red lights of the chamber. "Impossible," he snarled. No human could tame a Vorgath. But the evidence was undeniable. Daniel Harlan had not just survived Varath, he had conquered it. He had done what the Zorith themselves had failed to do for centuries. He had returned. Back on the planet's surface, Daniel stood at the shuttle's open ramp, his hand resting against the beast's thick hide. He could hear the frantic voices of the Zorith warriors inside, their weapons raised but their fingers hesitant on the triggers. He smirked. They were afraid. For the first time, the mighty conquerors of the galaxy didn't see him as weak. They saw him as a threat. He took a slow step forward, his voice calm but unshakable. "Take me to your warlord." The pilot bared his fangs, his pride keeping him from showing fear. "You were supposed to die," he spat, gripping his weapon. The Vorgath let out a deep, guttural snarl in response, its muscles tensing. The message was clear. The pilot could either obey or be torn apart where he stood. Swallowing his pride, the Zorith warrior lowered his rifle and stepped aside, allowing Daniel to board. The Vorgath moved with him, its massive form barely fitting inside the shuttle's bay. As the doors sealed shut and the engines roared to life, Daniel's smirk faded. This wasn't just about survival anymore. He had returned for something greater. When the shuttle arrived at the Zorith capital ship, a sea of warriors awaited them, their weapons drawn, their claws gripping their blades in anticipation. The warlord himself stood at the front, his red eyes burning with fury. He had never expected to see the human again, let alone standing beside the galaxy's most feared predator. Yet, here he was. Daniel stepped forward with the confidence of a man who no longer feared death. The Vorgath followed, its gaze sweeping over the gathered warriors like a predator assessing its prey. The silence in the hall was suffocating. The warlord's voice was low, filled with barely contained rage. "You dare return?" Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. "You exiled me to die," he said, his tone unwavering. "But instead, I became something greater. You thought my kind was weak, unworthy of standing among the stars. You thought I would be another corpse buried in the jungle." He gestured to the beast beside him. "But I learned what it means to survive in a world designed to kill. I became stronger than you could ever imagine. And now, I'm here to show you what that means." The warriors surrounding them shifted uncomfortably, their hands tightening around their weapons. They had never seen their warlord challenged before. The idea that a human, a species they had mocked, could return from the dead with a beast they had feared for centuries, it shattered their perception of dominance. The warlord's eyes narrowed, his claws twitching at his sides. "You think you are one of us now? That you are stronger than the Zorith?" He scoffed. "You are nothing." Daniel smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Then prove it," he said. "Fight me. Right here, right now. If I'm nothing, then kill me where I stand." He raised his arm slightly, as if inviting the attack. But no one moved. Not even the warlord. The silence stretched. The truth was clear. They weren't afraid of Daniel alone. They were afraid of what he represented. A human who had defied death. A human who had tamed what they could not. A human who had returned. And that fear was more powerful than any weapon. The warlord clenched his fists, his pride warring with reason. He could order Daniel's execution. He could command his warriors to strike. But he knew, deep inside, that it wouldn't change anything. The legend of the human who had conquered Varath had already been written. The fear had already spread. The Zorith had lost something greater than a battle. They had lost their illusion of supremacy. With a slow breath, the warlord stepped back. He didn't need to speak. His silence was the answer. Daniel had won. The Zorth had exiled him as a joke, but now he had returned as a symbol. And as he turned to leave, the Vorgath beside him letting out a low, rumbling growl. One thing was certain. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The Zorth High Council sat in uneasy silence, their reptilian eyes fixed on the massive holographic screen before them. Across the table, the warlord clenched his fists, his tail twitching in frustration. The human was back. Again. But this time, he was not alone. The image flickered for a moment before stabilizing, revealing the vastness of space behind Daniel Harlan. He stood at the bridge of a Terran warship, its dark steel hull bristling with weapons, its insignia glowing like a silent warning. The warlord's jaw tightened. Humanity had been underestimated before. That mistake would not be made again. Daniel took a step forward, his eyes calm, yet carrying the weight of what was about to come. He had walked through hell, had survived what no Zorth warrior ever had, and now he stood here not as an exile, not as prey, but as a representative of something far greater. He leaned slightly toward the screen, his voice steady and deliberate. "To the Zorth Empire," he began. "You sent me to die. You thought humanity was weak. You thought we were nothing." His lips curled into a smirk. "And yet, here I am." The room remained deathly quiet. The council members shifted in their seats, their expressions unreadable, but their fear was evident. The scars on Daniel's face were a testament to his survival, but it was not just him that terrified them. It was what he had brought back. The ship behind him wasn't just any vessel. It was human-built, designed for war, forged in the fires of battle. It was proof that humanity was not a race to be discarded. It was proof that they had made a grave mistake. Daniel continued, his tone unwavering. "I learned something on Verath. I learned that the universe is cruel, that the strong prey on the weak. That power is the only language spoken among the stars." He took a slow breath, his gaze sweeping across the council members. "Humanity speaks that language too." A murmur rippled through the council chamber. The warlord's claws tapped against the armrest of his throne, his mind racing. This wasn't just a speech. This was a warning, a declaration. The Zorth had always believed themselves to be the dominant force in the galaxy. For centuries, they had crushed weaker civilizations, enslaved entire species, and bent the stars to their will. But now, for the first time, they faced something they couldn't control. A species that refused to kneel. Daniel raised his hand, and behind him, the warship shifted. The hum of its engines grew louder, its weapons systems activating with a quiet, menacing precision. It wasn't an attack. Not yet. It was a demonstration. A message written in fire and steel. "You see this ship?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying an edge of finality. "This is one. Just one. Humanity has thousands more. You thought you were the hunters, but you never stopped to consider what would happen if the prey fought back." His eyes narrowed. "We are not here to beg for peace. We are here to tell you that things have changed. You no longer decide who lives and who dies. We do." The tension in the room thickened, the weight of his words settling over the council like a storm cloud. The warlord's mind churned with possibilities. Could the Zorth fight them? Could they crush humanity before it was too late? His instincts screamed at him to strike first, to end this threat before it could grow. But he hesitated. And in that hesitation, the power shifted. The silence stretched, each second more damning than the last. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving the council a moment to absorb his words. Then, with a final glance toward the warlord, he delivered the last piece of his message. "You made your move when you exiled me. Now, this is ours." The screen flickered, and in the distance, beyond the warship's hull, a massive fleet emerged from the void. Human ships, sleek, deadly, relentless, drifting into formation like a pack of wolves surrounding their prey. The Zorth had seen many armadas in their time, but none like this. none that filled them with such cold, creeping dread. The transmission cut out, leaving the chamber in silence. No more words were needed. The message had been received. Humanity had returned. And this time, they would not be ignored.